You may not consider yourself one for conspiracy theories. You easily tackle misinformation online, and extremism is something you only hear about on the news. But the impact of these developments is much closer than you think. Social media algorithms, which most of us use on a daily basis, are designed to create revenue. Given that heightened emotions on social media platforms often lead to increased engagement and subsequently more revenue, they wield significant influence over what we encounter. This growing phenomenon is having a direct impact on the perceptions of democratic institutions and trust in science. At worst, it has the ability to attempt to overthrow or disrupt democratically elected governments. Extreme political narratives have been rising across Europe, and these narratives influence mainstream political discourses and policies. It's about you, me, and the lives we lead. As a generation born in a time before the internet, there was a growing concern for those in the middle age. Not being digital natives, this group often still used traditional routes to gain information, such as print media, TV, and radio, but at the same time are engaging in online media. Without the tools to navigate, they rely on their perception of credible sources, making them easy targets for extremist narratives and misinformation through social media. This group of middle-aged adults between the ages of 45 and 65 is under-researched, but the impact of them being drawn into extremist content may have significant consequences on political discourse, democratic processes, and institutions, as they form a large group of people who may also be in decision-making positions, such as managers and policymakers, therefore have a direct influence on those who live in democracies like you and me. In this podcast, we will talk with experts in the field of research surrounding conspiracy theories and misinformation, joining both strength and knowledge in the newly founded Smidge Project. Research centers, universities, and NGOs from all over Europe will shine their light on new research findings and counter-narratives, education, and also training resources that are being developed to address fake news and misinformation.
Welcome to the Smidgecast. I'm Ella Anderson, and in this episode, we're diving into the world of fact-checking in the digital age. It benefits, it limits, and its evolving role of digital platforms. Misinformation is spreading faster than ever, making fact-checking both essential and incredibly challenging. How do we keep up? Who should be responsible? And where do we draw the line between regulation and free speech? To answer these questions, we're joined by Giovanni Ziccardi, a professor of legal informatics and expert of the intersection of law, technology, and digital rights at the University of Milan. As part of the Smidge Project, Giovanni and his team conduct horizon scanning on how online extremism and the malicious use of social media impact trust in governments, helping shape policy recommendations as well. Welcome to our episode, Giovanni. It's so nice to have you here again. Nice that you're back.
Thank you. It's really an honor for me.
Oh, thanks. And actually, you were the first guest in the first episode we ever did. So it's kind of a full circle that you're back here right now. Let's dive into the first question straight away. And we're diving back into the basics again. How would you define fact-checking in today's digital world? Because it has become such a central topic lately. How would you define fact-checking in today's digital world, but also what's driving this shift in your view?
Thank you for the question. In very simple words, and also for non-technical people, I think that fact-checking is a very complex process of verifying information circulating online, especially on social media and digital platforms. I say a very complex process because it involves the analysis of sources, the action of cross-referencing claims, and we try also to contextualize narratives to check their accuracy. The rise of misinformation, that is one of the core of the Smidge project, of course, has made fact-checking as a very fundamental tool to maintain public trust, but also for democracy and for a very well-informed society. When we started with the Smidge project, we saw that today it's very complex because the success of platforms brought also a disinformation boost. And so it's very difficult to check what is true, what is false, conspiracy theories, fake news, because they started to invade all our smartphones and our daily life. So it's also, and during the COVID-19, for example, we saw that we saw a boost of the spread of misinformation and fake news also on very complex and technical issues like medical issues. So in my opinion, it is a very good thing that the Smidge project is focused on fact checking also, because today is a central issue related to the speed of our daily life in technology. But also we saw the political and economic attention to these topics. And also in many cases, and here I close this first part, also in many cases that where politics and also the economics worlds really do a business with fake news and misinformation. So probably we are today in a year and in a period where it's very complex to analyze all the parts and all the characteristics of fact checking.
Yeah, good summary. And I can imagine, especially the volume of misinformation, as you said before, during the COVID pandemic, you saw a boost of misinformation about also very complex topics, which makes your assignment in the Smidge Project interesting yet complex at the same time, because that volume of misinformation makes fact checking really important, but also can feel like almost an overwhelming task because there is so much misinformation. And I was wondering, Giovanni, what are key challenges fact checkers face when verifying this online content, and how can efforts be scaled to meet the volume of misinformation online, as there is so much online to be found?
Yeah, this is a very important point, because day after day, the information on the digital society is growing and is growing. Just imagine how, for example, artificial intelligence in the last 2 years helped the creation of disinformation and disinformation. So from my point of view, there are four main challenges. One, as you told before, is related to the volume and the amount of misinformation. I think that it's impossible today a real-time verification on big platforms of what's happening. I mean a real-time human verification of what's happening. Then there is the virality of information, that it's a typical characteristic of platforms. So false information is brought to life by technology and started to spread faster, and it's very impossible also to come back and to reverse the impact. But as you can imagine, the work of a fact checker is more on the slow side than on the fast side, because they have to check sources and try to find information. So the virality is very important because it's related to the speed of the action of the fact checker. Then deepfake and AI and the manipulation of news. It's very easy to create a news that is false, but it seems true because it's because deepfake and AI made it very difficult to understand. And then the public perception. I think we are in a historical period in the last 2 years where in many cases fact checking is not seen so good, because for example from politics also, because they say that it's biased, is politically motivated, and so all these points required, in my opinion, a very complex approach. For example, artificial intelligence could be a great tool, in my opinion, for early detection, to gain collaboration between fact checkers, to analyze contents in platforms, but also literacy, AI literacy and digital literacy can educate the persons to critically assess this point of information. Then another great point, in my opinion, is that we need to check the reliability of fact checkers, because of course, if you've got such important work to do to check news, we have to check the absence of conflicts of interest, and also the reliability, the cultural perspectives, the capacity of fact checkers. And today there is a very big debate about this, because usually from a technical point of view, the news to check are sent to the fact checkers by the platform itself. They forward contents to company, also to very I'll say trusted companies, to outsource this activity, because it's impossible, as we said, for the amount of information to check in real time. This is very interesting from one point, but there is the point of the selection of the news that are checked, also the knowledge and the competence of these entities that are checking and that are working with the platforms. And last but not least, these companies, also trusted flaggers, are paid by platforms. And so we can also discuss about a possible conflict of interests, or as a form of influence and pressure. It's very interesting, for example, to analyze when platforms decide to send contents to these companies, but also who decide what content you have to fact check on the platform. So, in my opinion, there are, alongside the volume, that it's the main problem. I agree with you. I think that there are several points also related to the business model of fact checking as related to platforms that can draw this this painting very risky, in my opinion, and that's why we are facing a sort of crisis of fact checking in the last month, also for these problems, in my opinion.
The role of governments, I would like to talk with you about, because in fact checking, it seems like the role of governments is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, there is a stronger oversight that could help set standards, but on the other, there's always the risk of turning it almost into a political tool. How do you see this balance, and should governments be more involved in regulating fact-checking practices on digital platforms?
I think that today fact-checking is also a political issue and an information warfare issue, because the risk that fact-checking can become a propaganda tool is real. And for example, in the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, we saw several cases about the creation of the video or deepfakes or information that was simply all the footage information, for example, from 2017, that were used in the new context, in the new war context, to present facts that were not real. So this is a very delicate balance, in my opinion, because, of course, from one side, democratic governments can help to set standards, to support transparency, and to help fact checkers to understand if a fact is real or not. But of course, it's very attractive for governments the use of fact checking also for political purposes. So, for example, with no direct intervention from government, but also using fact checking to present several point of views. And on the other side, other governments are very interested to create a sort of cooperation between academics, between government agencies, between schools, to adhere to transparency and accountability standards, also for platforms. In my opinion, today we are more on the side that the political world is using fact-checking as a propaganda tool, not with a very, how to say, precise analysis, and because we saw that it's very useful, especially in a world where a lot of information comes from our smartphones and from the online sources. So it's very important to discuss about this, because this is very interesting. Is a sort of dual use tool, fact checking. You can use it for the benefit of democracy and freedom of expression, but you can use it also as a propaganda tool to try to to spread false information. This is a very important border or balance, in my opinion.
Now, there are also some developments that are quite the opposite to what you're saying. Meta, the company that owns, for example, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, they recently announced that changing their fact-checking policy will include relying more on community notes rather than professional moderators. What are your thoughts on this shift?
Well, of course, I work in a university in Europe, so we from Europe, I think that we are seeing a sort of two parts division of the world, where in the US all the big platforms are deciding to also use a fact checking or change the fact checking policies, but in Europe, on the other side, we've got the Digital Services Act and a very specific legislation that tries to regulate this topic. So I see a clash between the US approach, the North American approach, and the European approach. On one side, the platforms said that in the last year they invested a lot to try to deal with fact-checking and with fake news. But with the election of Trump, I think that the choice of Elon Musk on X to abandon fact-checking and was a very important move also from a political aspect, because it influenced also YouTube and Google and Meta and really changed the foundation of the system of fact-checking today. We have to remember that the big platforms today are based in the United States. And so there is a sort of clash between the regulation of the European Union and the United States. In the future, if the North American platforms will decide not to enforce the Digital Services Act, and especially the rules that ask accountability to platforms in the way they check fake news or also the activity of the community with the notice of fake news, it will be a very political problem. This was not only a choice of Meta, but several platforms thought about to leave to the community the activity to check if something is true or false. In my opinion, this is very dangerous because on one side, if you've got a company that for authority, culture, and the knowledge of these topics can decide what is false and true is one thing. But on the other side, to leave to the community, and we know how the community is made in platforms, especially in groups, I think it's a very high risk. I really prefer the oversight of the platforms with all the problems we said, so the problem of volume, the problem of investments. So in my opinion, fact-checking must remain a very serious and complex activity from the platform. Of course, dialoguing with the community and with the use of AI systems that can help also to deal with the volume.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a really upfront question to you, but I think it's really important relating to what you said before. Should platforms, when they can't fact check, be upfront when they are unable to fact check specific content?
I think that transparency is very important because transparency can build trust in people. So if platforms admit when they lack sufficient data or resources to fact check a news or a claim, I think that it's a good signal of honesty. But on the other side, we have to understand how to deal with this, because on one side, the platform says we can't verify this. But on the other side, we can, for example, give to users and or trusted users the ability to evaluate sources, to check what the platform cannot do. But transparency, also from the European Union approach, transparency is the heart, in my opinion, of this this activity and this topic.
Giovanni, AI is increasingly being used in fact-checking processes. You mentioned this in your previous answer as well. And while it's undeniably fast, it also raises questions about reliability, because AI also has a certain view on the world. What do you think AI's role should be in the modern fact-checking process?
In my opinion, there is one problem, one very big problem, that the natural language of persons is very difficult for interpretation. So, on one side, it's very difficult to really understand the meaning of the meaning of the language using AI. But on the other side, AI is the most powerful tool we have today to deal with a vast amounts of data quickly, to detect patterns, and also to flag potentially false claims that, for example, a natural person can then check. So, in my opinion, we have to know that AI lacks human judgment, cannot understand the contextual meaning of some words, and so cannot interpret correct, for example, some typical expressions. But on the other side, it's the only tool we have today to assist human fact checkers, not to replace, but to assist human fact checkers. So in my idea, if you can reach to create a cooperation between AI tools and the human activity, it's great. Especially for speed, because it's really powerful AI. So can, for example, do a prior check to several big amounts of contents, and then leave to the human sensibility also the analysis of the most controversial issues. I think that's today is the only tool we have that can really deal with such amount of data.
We already talked about this briefly, deepfakes. And deepfakes, they have taken misinformation to a whole new level. When even what we see with our own eyes cannot be trusted anymore. It's quite scary, in my opinion. Where does fact-checking go from here? How do you see it evolving with this challenge coming up front now?
I think that deepfakes can be analyzed with very specific forensics tools and activities. For example, detecting inconsistencies in images and videos, analyzing metadata, but also checking, doing a cross-reference of several sources. The problem is that deepfake today is becoming more and more realistic. So today also the declaration of persons and the public awareness become very important. In many cases of deepfakes, the only thing you can say is I was not there, or it wasn't me. So it's very important, the technical part for deepfakes analysis, but also, in my opinion, the public awareness, but also the public trust. To start to teach young people in the schools, you must have a critical eye on everything you see. Try to understand if it could be real, the sources, but also the context. And this is very important. On one side, it's sad because it means that everything we will see in the next month, a video or image, a text, an audio with my voice, could be false. But on the other side, it's the only way, the critical eye, in my opinion, is the only way to deal with a very important problem like deepfake.
I would like to shift a little bit more to the outcomes of fact-checking, because we talked about the issues and the issues that come with fact-checking. But when it comes to combating fake news and disinformation, what are real measurable impacts of fact-checking? What do we see? Does fact-checking bring us something, or is it just a drop in an ocean full of misinformation?
It depends, I think, because I read, for example, some studies. In the Smidge Project, we used also some studies from the European Commission about conspiracy theories. And it was very interesting because there are persons that also, if you clearly explain point by point which are the false assertion or the first parts of a document, they still believe despite fact-checking. So, in my opinion, on one side, fact-checking is fundamental. It plays an essential role in countering disinformation. But on the other side, we must be conscious that the impact could be very low in some persons because the believing in false news is stronger than fact check. So probably the good idea is to start with education, especially to explain the clear difference between a good fact checking and a false belief that could be, for example, radicated in our culture, in our family, in our group. And so it's important, but probably there are parts of the society and persons where also if you do a perfect fact checking of a false claim, they still believe in this false claim.
Yeah, and listening to this, Giovanni, I really wonder, what does it say about us as a society that fact-checking has become so necessary?
On one side, the misinformation has always existed, and so our society is ready to deal also with this old topic. But we have to really understand how digital technology changed the framework with the amplification, the speed. And so the problem, in my opinion, is not the core of the idea of false news or fact checking. The problem is that today we have to understand if it's false or true in a couple of seconds, in 6 seconds. And so we are more vulnerable to deception. We've got a very low attention to everything is on our smartphone. It's very difficult today also to check one fact or one news at a time. In our daily life, we've got 5 or 6 activities that we do in real time together. So it's not the problem to understand, in my opinion, what is true and what is false. It's a problem to do it in the actual digital society.
Yeah. Now, looking at it from a European perspective, there is a new Digital Service Act, and it will, well, that's actually my question to you. Do you believe the EU Digital Service Act will impact how platforms approach fact-checking and disinformation of misinformation in the EU?
But I think that we have to think about a theoretical and a practical approach. From a theoretical point of view, I think that DSA is great. It's a great piece of norms. It calls for a responsibility to platforms. It deals with content moderation, fact-checking obligation, trusted flaggers. I think that the architecture of this DSA is perfect, but it was made in European Union, and in European Union we do not have very important problems of fact-checking related to providers and platforms European Union based. So from a practical point of view, we will have to see if DSA will be understood and enforced also by the North American and Chinese platforms that today I think about TikTok, social networks, but also Meta and Facebook.
Yeah, and in that time of a very critical time with the DSA in the making, how can governments and academia collaborate to create, well, a more effective fact-checking ecosystem?
I think that to fight disinformation and to enforce fact checking, we have to create a sort of perfect cocktail between funding independent research on misinformation trends, and independence, as we told before, is important. Also developing open source and transparent fact-checking tools, and education, promoting media literacy programs in schools, in public institutions. Smidge and the team in Smidge for the dissemination is doing an incredible work also to bring the ideas of conspiracy theories and fact-checking outside the technical groups, but also in the schools, between journalists, on television, to understand this is a problem that from a very young age till the middle age, because Smidge is focused on middle age, is also an educational problem and media literacy program.
Well, Giovanni, we can talk about this topic for hours, I feel, and it has been wonderful to hear your knowledge. However, we have arrived to the last question of this podcast. And it is a question that I'm asking on behalf of all the listeners of this podcast. What advice, as an expert in this field, would you give to individuals that are navigating these overwhelming platforms with a flood of misinformation online?
I think that it's strange to say, but today we all must be very calm, and we have to pause before sharing, because one of the important points of misinformation is that it spreads because people react very quickly. So today, the check of the sources, read 2 or 3 times a text could really help. The second point is to have multiple perspectives about a news. This is very difficult because we've got echo chambers today. So the profiling activities of platforms only give us the news that are related to our former thoughts. But it's very important to look at several sources and multiple perspectives. And third point, be very skeptical of viral content, because it's a content that is created also to try to manipulate emotions and to clickbaiting, for example. So keep calm is the first suggestion. Check a lot of sources, and in the hacker world they say, be paranoid. No, I don't want to say be paranoid, but be very skeptical about today what we see on platforms and on our smartphone. This could be, in my opinion, a good cocktail of final suggestions.
Yeah, keep calm and be skeptical, but also hopeful for a future in which we check the misinformation. Giovanni, thank you so much for being here with us today. That brings us to the end of this episode of the Smidgecast. It's clear that misinformation and fact-checking will remain to be key topics for a long time, as they touch every part of our lives and also shape the world around us. A huge thanks again to Giovanni Ziccardi for joining us and sharing his valuable insights with us. And of course, thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. If you find this discussion interesting, be sure to follow Smidgecast for more episodes in Smidge Project at www.smidgeproject.eu, or follow us on X, LinkedIn, or Blue Sky at Smidge Project. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep fact-checking.
I am Ella Buck. This is a Smidgecast, and if you want to learn more about Smidge and our work, visit smidgeproject.eu or connect with us on X at the Smidge Project. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please consider sharing it to support our mission. Thank you for listening.